Let's move on to the member-specific segment. Ben, what are we going to talk about?
Well, it's something we've kind of hinted about throughout this entire episode and almost kind of dovetails nicely with what we're talking about with the cost, which is what are the things that keep us coming back to certain games? Why is it that certain games we just come back to over and over and over again? Why are there certain games that, we play it, oh, that was such a good game, and then you just never play it again? What are those strange X factors for all of us?
Right. Why is Yokohama Yokohama and Gaia Project, right? Kind of.
Right. Or Barrage for me, Barrage, or
sure.
Terraforming Mars. Why are those games that seem to always get to the table, whereas some really wonderful designs just never quite get there?
That's a good point. It's a good point. I mean, I'll start it off if you want me to.
Sure.
For me, there is a uniqueness in mechanism that often has a lot to do with. Now, listen, Lorenzo breaks almost all of my rules. Almost everything I'm going to talk about now, Lorenzo breaks. Lorenzo doesn't have. I mean, I guess everyone having to share the 3 dice. You don't have your own set of dice. Everyone has to use the same dice. That's kind of unique and kind of interesting and really sets the tone for the game. But for the most part, for me, if it has a unique mechanism that I've never quite seen before, and that mechanism is tied to the theme or design of the game, that gets my juices flowing. So in Barrage, the fact that water is going to flow down, other people can catch that water and use it, is a mind-blowing addition to the game lexicon. Normally, you gather resources, you convert them into points, and that's the end of that. And to have that not be the end of that is the thing that makes Barrage so unique and so amazing. And the fact that it is dams and water makes it thematically relevant and ties in together. Democker, my favorite game of all time, has so many different mechanisms that all come together to feel like everything about it feels thematic. It feels like I am putting Bill Clinton out into the field to stump for me in South Dakota, right? I feel like I'm doing a heavy ad buy in Arkansas to try and get that vote. I feel like those sorts of things together are really unique. So that for me is one of the things that is the strongest indicator that this is going to be a game that I'm not just going to keep in my collection, but my eye is going to be drawn to it on the shelf.
Yeah, I feel like, I think interesting decisions are really important. I think that's something I think about a lot. Although, admittedly, some of these games have really interesting decisions, and they still don't make it to the table. I mean, I'll often say to myself, like, "Oh, this game is cool, but are these decisions interesting?" And I think that, like, when you have a really good puzzle in the game, that is not just creating interesting decisions, but also creating a really strong emotional response, like a strong, like, oh, I need to do this, but I can't do that, and I want to do that, and oh my God, there's so much I want to do, and if I don't do this, then he's gonna do that. I think that it creates a really like marvelous tension that I will definitely go back to that game to sort of like crack that nut again. That's what happens to me with Great Western Trail a lot, Barrage, Terraforming Mars. That's you're just putting those cards together and trying to figure out like how's the best way I can get this to work out. Underwater Cities is also the same for me. Like, oh, I need this card, but I want that card. If I can really get like a really juicy choice that I have to choose between, that will definitely have me coming back.
Yeah, totally. Paul?
Yeah, I think ultimately for me, I'm looking for something that's going to create an emotional response for me and my people I play with. There's never a game that I would want to play that the other players don't want to play. And so I think Trey put it best. He talked about good frustration. I think a game that can really elicit good frustration, usually meaning that the stakes are very high in the two choices or there's a lot of choices, versus bad frustration, which is basically I can't do anything. And I think like a game that can elicit good frustration is what, and I don't want to say something so overarching, is what we actually find good in games.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love Avalon because it starts off with like this percentage of like everyone is, could be good or bad, and it slowly comes down to now I have to decide who is good and bad, and the stakes are so high now because like if I choose wrong, the game's over and I lose it. And so like it really deals with frustration in a really good way. It changes from like broad frustration to narrow frustration with high stakes, but it never becomes bad frustration. Mm-hmm. So that's how I would say it. Like, if you can find a game, and what people consider frustrating is very different. Like we like the idea of progress. We like games that feel like, oh, we're building something, we're making something. But ultimately, the frustration comes from, are we making the right thing? Are we making the best version of that thing? And I think like those, when it's clear what you're building, what it's clear what you're trying to do. I'll quote Jesse now. Like, you hit that level of flow. Yeah. And if you get flow, involvement, and that, and for me, the thing that I really care about is stake. I know you want to win. Because you want to win, I want to take that from you. Now we're dealing with it on any emotional engagement,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's what I look for in a game.
I think that a narrative arc is also really important. I think that I think flow and interesting decisions. I think everything we've talked about is all really, really important. And I think probably ultimately what will be the final answer is everything we're talking about, a game that has all those elements is going to be the one that we come back to.
Sure.
But I think that also a narrative arc is essential. And what I mean is not that it's a storytelling game. It's that, it's like sort of like I feel like most entertainments that we have follow like a 3-act structure in some form or another. Mm-hmm. And I think games do that as well. The best games really follow that. I think of Concordia. I even think of Catan. Like the way the beginning of the game feels is remarkably different than the way the end of the game feels in terms of the board state, what you're doing, what you're able to pull off. And I think, and same with Avalon, just the way things start and the way they develop, it should take you a little bit on a journey. And I think of some games, I think of Yokohama, I think of Coimbra, I think of, I don't know, there are a bunch of games that maybe don't take us on that journey as strongly. I don't think, like maybe one of the issues with Yokohama is that there are really interesting decisions. There's a lot of fun stuff of trying to figure out your paths, and there's a lot of like joking at the table, like, oh, you're in my way. But in the end, you're just sort of like picking up resources and cashing them in. And it's really fun along the way, but maybe sometimes there's not a huge amount of difference between the beginning and the end of the game. You have more buildings up. You may have some more powers, but it doesn't have that like narrative arc that like maybe captures the imagination a little bit.
Were we talking about Lorenzo?
Well, that might be an issue for some people with Lorenzo. But Lorenzo, you do sort of feel like, well, I've built up my player board and I have like I can run my little engine here or there. So I do feel like maybe it engages more in that way. I think maybe that's why engine building games, people really love those because they sort of have an inherent 3-act structure in them.
Maybe.
I'm gonna pick the 4 games of the Game Brain top 50 that are the outliers. The ones that
yes.
Looking at other people's lists and looking at our list, the 4 games that are the odd man out that aren't going to be on other people's lists are Avalon, Tichu, Ricochet Robots, and Fresh Fish. Fish. Those are the 4. And when you look at them, I think that the common element in those is heightened emotional state. In Ricochet Robots, it is because of the timer. It's because everybody is staring completely silently at a board and trying to outthink the other 10 people that are staring at that board that second. And when somebody calls out a number and you realize you were about a second away from saying that same number, it's just crushing. In Fresh Fish, the fact that you are being boxed into worse and worse position as the game goes on, and just dying to be able to do something that seems so simple, which is just build this thing and have a road go to the place that it's supposed to go to. It seems so simple, but the game conspires to kill that in you. Teach you are working with a partner and you are desperate for that partner to do A instead of B, but I have no way to tell them to do A, not B, and that partnership element is so strong. And Avalon, the whole game of Avalon is essentially a crucible in which we are attempting to figure out what the hell is going on while it just huge heightened emotionality. And so those 4 games, which coincidentally are 4 of my absolute favorite games, I wouldn't say they're exactly narrative or theatrical. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I
mean,
teach you only in the sense of points, because teach you the last round is exactly the same as the first round, except for, we're
you're right,
100 points from winning, but
yeah, Ricochet Robots I would not say has a huge 3-act structure.
No,
unless it has an emotional 3-act structure where you start to where it's like in the beginning someone's saying like certain like 10, but then the pressure gets on, so that it sort of like ramps up. Like I gotta be faster at this. I gotta be faster. I'm running out of time. So like you could make an argument for that.
I think it's more of a game show.
Ultimately, maybe where the intersection is that with a 3-act structure or a narrative arc, it's going to get you emotionally invested.
Yeah.
And so whether you're emotionally invested because of a narrative arc, which will, I think, do it pretty easily, or the game creates that heightened emotional state, you're going to be emotionally invested. And especially if you can be emotionally invested in something with a bunch of friends, that's kind of the best, right? And because then you walk away from it like, oh my God, remember that time, da-da-da-da-da. Remember, even, Paul, I think something you mentioned too is like the memories, right? And I think if you have a playthrough of any game that just you're like, oh wow, that was great, you're gonna want to go back there and relive those memories, because I feel like sometimes part of setting up a game night and putting that board on the table is like there's a little bit of social engineering, right? You kind of want to like, you're like, oh yeah, I have these 3 friends, and I bet if we do this, we're going to have an amazing time, because I remember I played it once and I got this great emotional response when I played this game, and I would love to see how it would play out with these people instead, because I bet it would be even better,
Totally.
I mean, I think there's 2 things that games do. There's what it does for you, and then what it does for everyone. And I feel like for all of it, everyone who plays games will tend to enjoy puzzles. They'll tend to enjoy like, oh, here, how can I do blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But what makes board games great is that you guys are doing it together.
Yeah.
And that's not always, no game mechanism is ever going to make me go like, oh my God, I love this game because of its mechanism. At the very best, I go, oh, that's quite intriguing. That's intellectually interesting. And I'm very interested in trying to understand that. But almost always going to be how it pulls your group together, because games are here to connect. Like we're playing games so that we can hang out, so we can, revel in each other's humanity. It sounds all touchy-feely, but like, I think
true though.
I think that's what games are for. And I think with that, as long as the game facilitates that, but its ability to facilitate that is what's going to make me go to the game more often.
Yeah. Now, I have a question, because one thing that people focus on a lot is variability in a game, right? And it seems like everything we're discussing seems like it could exist independently of variability. So does a game need to be variable? Does it need to have a whole bunch of different setups, et cetera, to make make it work?
My thought on that is like, part of a game is having people come in together with stake, interested in the game. But once a game becomes stagnant, that then you lose people investing their emotional energy into it, because like, oh, it's this form, I know what this is. Variability keeps that longevity.
Yeah, there are some games. What you don't want is you don't want a game to become stagnant. I think that's exactly what Paul said. Look, Ricochet Robots has no variability, really. I mean, the board changes every single time you play, but other than that, no variability. But Ricochet Robots is more of a game show than a game. And guess what? Game shows are exactly the same every single time. The challenge for each question is different, but there's no real difference in the game itself. Whereas, but there are some games that feel a little samey from time to time and from play to play, and I don't want to feel samey, right? Most games, they don't need a lot of variability to become very different plays, right?
Right.
They don't need a lot.
Yeah,
just a little.
Yeah, I always think of Hansa Teutonica. That's my go-to for something that's like pretty much the exact same setup every single time and always has a very fascinating evolution of the game that's different. And I always wonder, why does that game work so well? And it has literally the same beginning, just the smallest ounce of variability, whereas other games just go out of their way to just create the most variable setup that you can even imagine. There's this and there's that and there's this and that. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. So I wonder what that is that causes
there's
that stagnancy.
There's an assuredness in the design, right? It's always safe to create all sorts of variables. You have to balance them, you have to play test them, but it's safe. Whereas if you stick your flag in the sand and say, here is the game, it has no variability, but after each person has taken 3 moves, the game will take unique shapes each and every time you play it. That's somebody that knows what they're talking about, right? That's somebody that really knows what they're doing, and they're doing that. And let's recognize that in Hansa Teutonica, there are 2 innovations that keep that game fresh and cool, which is that you have your own player board. It was one of the first, if not the first game to do this, where as you achieve things on the board, you are unlocking additional abilities on your own board. And there are 6 different abilities that you can unlock, all of which tremendously valuable. And the order in which you do that and the amount of resources you have to spend to do that are highly variable. That's one thing. The second thing is that it is not a zero-sum game on the board. You can take somebody's piece off of a place. You have to spend more to do it, but there is a little take that happens in the course of the game, and that creates a tremendous amount of variability super quickly, because your move is no longer just affecting your move, it's often affecting another player's move.
Yeah, and I'm not arguing that variability is like
no.
It's worthless. I think it works really. It can be really fun when you have, especially if it's like an issue of like special powers or whatever. But I guess the question is, I think that like it seems like what we've landed on is that if you can get an emotional response, like a really vivid emotional response from a game, you're going to come back to it. And maybe variability is just one of those factors that lends like the intrigue to it, and sometimes it's like a blatant variability where it's like, oh, this time I'm playing with this country that has these powers, and sometimes it's subtle, like in Concordia, where it's just a matter of where those little tokens wind up and what resources are in what locations and what can you access at a certain time, that somehow just has like this rippling effect on everything, but enough that it creates it, like it adjusts the puzzle that you're intrigued to go back again, and then when you go back again, like it just like you then are plunging yourself into all those great emotional experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Absolutely. Another thing, when you were talking about the narrative element to the game, it brought up something to me that I wanted to bring up. I've brought it up before, but tangibility is something that a lot of my favorite games share. And that means when I am looking at the board from the beginning to the end of the game, the board is different. I see that even if I don't win, I don't care what my score is, I've accomplished something. Terraforming Mars, we have terraformed the planet. It has gone from this barren piece of nothing, and now look at all the things that are on it, right? Agricola is the classic example of that. Look at my little paddock with my little sheep in this one and my little cows in this one, and look at my nice stone house that I've built and the rows of grain that I've
Castles of Bad King Ludwig is like, that's kind of the entire reason to play that game is really just to see how your castle looks at the end.
Completely. Gaia, when you look at the top games, Great Western Trail, Gaia Project, Barrage, all of these have a very strong tangibility to them.
Yeah, that's why I love a city building game, and I get mad at a city building game that doesn't look like a city. I have never played Quadropolis, for instance. I probably should play it. I'm sure it's supposed to be super fun, but I get upset that it's a city building game. But when I look at game states, they don't look like cities to me. I like something that suburbia actually looks like a city, because when you look at it, if you actually look carefully, the tiles have roads and it actually creates a grid. You may not realize it at first. And it's fun to be like, oh, look, there's the vet next to the dump, and that's like next to the high-end place, and it tells its own story by how you laid out your city. I think I agree. That is such a fun part of gaming.
Right? And it creates that jigsaw puzzle effect where jigsaw puzzle is something mindless, but you've created something out of nothing. You've taken chaos, and you've created order.
And then you talk about it with your friends, like, look at this. And it's funny because it's something that brings everyone together. So if it's either the board and you're like, oh, well, look at this or look at that, whatever, or you're comparing like, oh, well, my mansion, I've got my garden next to, or my castle, I got my garden next to like the bathroom or something like that. And everyone's comparing what their castles look like at the end. And that's, again, another way to create an emotional response.
Yeah, food chain magnate. I mean, not only the board, but look at my employment structure. Look at all these people that I've employed. Look how amazing it is that I have the sushi chef and blah blah blah. Right? Yeah.
There invariably comes a time in Food Chain Magnate, I feel like, where I've played with my friends where someone says, oh, well, Judy is certainly like, she is like the mayor of the north side of the town, and oh, I'm like the west side. Like sometimes you start talking about these places like they're real neighborhoods, and that's fun.
Totally.
Like you and I are such different people. Like, for example, there's only one game that I do that where I go like, oh wow, look at that, look at how we've landed, and that's Santiago. And I'm only looking at the wasteland, the fallow field. Like, oh wow, that canal overseer really did a good job there.
Yes.
Well, that's because you're Godzilla and you like to tear down buildings. So like you would not be happy with a beautifully like a nice beautiful suburban enclave.
But Paul is right. Paul is right. You can look at a game of Santiago when it's done and tell the skill of the players by how many fallow fields there are. The more devastation there is in Santiago, the more you realize, oh, They had a good game. I can tell. Somebody there were a bunch of people saying, no, you haven't given me enough. All must die.
There was a knife fight there. I see. There was a battle here.
Yes.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, you very well might enjoy the other videos you now see being suggested to you on screen. Also, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could like, share, or subscribe to our Game Brain channel. Thanks so much.